Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Frame Found podcast. I am your host, Chris Tinsley, and for this week's episode, we are going to be talking about why it is so hard to create a system that is simple. Already mentioned it in previous episodes. The structure that I'm going to go with, just kind of experimenting with, is just a barrage of questions, and I'm just going to fly through them as fast as I can in order to keep myself from going down too far into a rabbit hole. So having said all that, let's just jump into the first question. Why are simple systems harder to build than complicated ones? Why are simple systems harder to build than complicated ones? I think it's really hard in anything in life to distill something down to something simple. And you guys hear me, I'm a big fan of principles and fundamentals. And I think just in a professional sense, in a work context with just increasing complexity, it's harder to distill things down to something that is simple. And I think I would like to believe, I do think it's true, that in any system in which complexity is increasing, you're taking on other things like risk that the system just won't operate as intended, whether that be from a technical lens or from human to human lens. I think it's just really important, to keep things as simple as possible, but you can't even really just say that. It's just, and simple to other people may mean something else. Complex to another person might mean something else. It just, I don't know. I think that's kind of why I wanted to do this episode, is to kind of explore it more. But I don't know, just at the end of the day, just having a grasp on the fundamentals, on the principles, is important. So let's keep it moving. Why do teams so often mistake complexity for control? I think when I see this question, what I think of is, a use case or a situation came up and it's like, oh, well, we can create a field for that, or we could create an automation for that. And it's like, yeah, but is that really going to solve the problem? Is that actually going to maybe perhaps create a net new problem? Is it taking into account any sort of edge cases? Why do teams often mistake complexity for control? I don't know. I mean, I mentioned this in previous episodes, I could use all these terms to make something sound complicated. And I don't even want to start to rant on that list because it's just so gross and just, I don't know. It's a nauseating list. But for instance, right, just for context, and I have the list in a previous episode or whatever, but I could say things like a critical path, or like a burn down, or like a burn up, or I could say like waterfall or agile or scrum or Kanban board or Gantt chart or dependency chain or a roadmap, or a start and an SF and an FF and a lead and a lag and a pivot table. I could say things like a level of effort or like a workload chart or a capacity. It's just gross. It just doesn't help anybody out when you just say those things and make it more complicated. I do think that, I have seen it in the past, just throughout the years. There is a level of gatekeeping almost, where it's, there's some people that kind of use that as a power move. For whatever reason. I know that sounds kind of extreme, but it kind of is that. The reason why I bring it up is I think, that's a potential for why some teams might make something complicated. There could be like a personal gain that comes from that. But I think just at the end of the day, if you're a leader and you're looking out for the best interest of your teams, it's just important to distill things down to a fundamental. I just think the opposite is, I think, why do teams so often mistake complexity for control? I don't know. It's almost like a meta question, because there could be several reasons for it. It could be, whatever it is that's in a person or a team's head just makes sense to them. But if it doesn't resonate or make sense to, another team, because what you're doing is a cooperative effort, right? If these two groups of people don't understand what the other one is trying to say, then it doesn't matter. Like, it's not going to work. But I think, and even if you understand that, then you can start to kind of improve on that. And so, I don't know. Let's just move on to the next question. What does a simple system actually require underneath it? All right, so the subtext here is more clarity, better decisions, cleaner ownership, fewer assumptions. What does a simple system actually require underneath it? More clarity, better decisions, cleaner ownership, fewer assumptions. I mean, I think I'm just coming off of, the episode from a tech standpoint, but like, what does a simple system actually require underneath it? More clarity, better decisions, cleaner ownership, fewer assumptions. I would also add on top of that, fewer features or functions or applications of functions. It is all of these things. Yeah, it's that and more. Yeah, let's move on. Why is subtraction harder than addition in operations? Why is it harder to remove steps than to keep layering them on? I think the first thing that comes to mind is that as nuance and edge cases kind of increase, that you can point back to the process and it's like, oh, we have a step or we have a function that addresses that exact thing, even though it becomes another gate to have to pass through if it's a process-oriented thing, or it could be a feature or a function in a work management platform that creates more risk potentially. Why is subtraction harder than addition in operations? Why is it harder to remove steps than to keep layering them on? I think it's just easier to keep layering them on because there's a justification for why the step exists because of some type of a situation that happened, but that's not necessarily the right thing to do. I think it needs to be carefully evaluated. Like, maybe the situation that happened was an edge case in and of itself that you don't need to completely overhaul the process or the system. It could just be corrective action that has to be taken with, a teammate. That's just what comes to mind. But in the spirit of just keeping this going, I'm going to move on. When does a system stop helping and start creating drag? What does that usually look like in practice? When it's just tough to follow any sort of a process, or if you have a tech stack of sorts in which you have to click so many things or have to answer so many questions, and even then there are follow-up questions from it. Like, God forbid, maybe the situation that you're in is an edge case and then all of a sudden your request is lost. Maybe there's a configuration that didn't trigger properly. When does the system stop helping and start creating drag? What does that usually look like in practice? It just comes in so many forms. Like, the moment that your gut just says, hey, this feels a little heavy in terms of to get a certain thing done, I think it's time to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Why is so much friction happening? What are teams usually compensating for when they overbuild? Unclear ownership, weak decision-making, lack of trust, fear of mistakes. God, I don't know. It could be all of that. I've seen throughout my entire career, I've seen instances of all of those things. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just a really human-centric person, but I do find that a lot of these problems stem from the human-to-human interaction amongst people, and the adoption of some sort of a tool or a platform as a means to kind of bring those groups together. But like in previous episodes, if you don't know how to configure a system, with like a pen and paper amongst a group of folks, if you start using power tools or, just tools, you're just going to amplify the already known fact that, again, the system on pen, on paper, conversations amongst like other people just isn't working. So it's just going to make things worse. But did I answer that question? What are teams usually compensating for when they overbuild? Unclear ownership, weak like decision making, lack of trust, fear of mistakes. It's all of the above. Next question. What's the difference between a simple system and an underbuilt one? What is the difference between a simple system and an underbuilt one? When is something clear? When is something clear and clean, and when is it just vague? I don't know. I think human instinct on that one again. I think a lot of this stuff really comes down to human instinct, because if the system is built in such a way that it satisfies the needs of the team, and for the person on the other side, like managing the work or dispatching the work or creating the work, that it's easy for them to kind of get things into the system, and then for people to then take those inputs and then create their appropriate outputs. If that's happening up and down the whole chain, then you know that you're doing something right. That's really the best way to put it. What should a simple system make easier for people? Should it make decisions faster, handoffs cleaner, progress clearer, and work easier to move? All of the above on that one. Yeah, just what should a simple system make easier for people? It's the whole operation, like whatever the workflow or the process is that you've outlined or that you've created. I guess if we were to look at that from a pen and paper perspective, right? Just the minimal amount of steps, you've got some sort of racy-like matrix of sorts. People just understand what their role is in each thing. I mean, I would almost say that, in my observation throughout so many years, things come down to roles and responsibilities, right? When there's gaps in those things and people don't understand what their role is in a given part of a workflow or a process, then things collapse. And if you install some sort of work management platform of sorts, then you're just going to amplify that. And I think it's just important to understand when there's friction, that you take a step back and you take the highest vantage point you possibly can and just be like, okay, what's really going on here, right? If I took out this thing, is that going to fix it? If I took this out, is it going to fix it? More often than not, you're going to find that it's a roles and responsibilities problem. And that is process oriented. It's within every step of a process. You've got, if we were to look at it from a racy perspective, which for those of you who don't know, it's a responsibility matrix. The R stands for responsible, the A is accountable, the C is a contributor, and the I is informed. So it's like, who is actually responsible for getting a thing done? Who's accountable for the execution or the quality of that output? Who's allowed to contribute, to kind of have comments and thoughts on a thing, and who just needs to be informed that, like this thing is happening, right? That's ultimately what a RACI is. It's just roles and responsibilities. But if you look at that as applied to a workflow or to a process up and down the entire chain, there's technically a RACI associated to every step. And so I don't know. I think it's kind of a word that's maybe been kind of captured, might be the wrong word. It's just being used incorrectly, or maybe it's becoming almost like a soundbite of sorts. Also, it's tough too because people use that as a means to dodge responsibility, which that just creates an entirely separate problem. Like that's almost like a soft skill leadership issue, is like being able to snuff out when those types of things are happening. But it doesn't mean that a RACI in and of itself you should just throw out, right? It's just understanding that there's different factors and nuances that come along with really any sort of governing component, right? It doesn't mean that anything is necessarily right or wrong. There's just other factors that can either like directly or indirectly undermine whatever the thing is. So let's just keep it moving. Why do the best systems often look obvious after they're built? Is that why people underestimate how hard simplicity actually is? Okay, why do the best systems often look obvious after they're built? I don't really know. I think it's so fascinating. Me growing up doing these things, all the experiences I've had where I get to a configuration or understand a situation so well, and you try things out, some things works and some things don't, and then you get to a configuration that actually works, and then you step back and you're just like, are you kidding me? It was really that simple? Like, how did I? And I don't know. It's almost like that's almost part of, I mean, that's kind of the point, really, because you're trying to get down to something that is simple. And it's, I don't know, is there some sort of quote where it's like to truly understand something is to be able to communicate it in a simple way, or to communicate it to a child of sorts? I don't know. There's some sort of quote out there, but there's something to be said about that. And it's like when you reach that point of something that is simple and it just sings and it works, it's like that's when you have a true understanding of the thing. And I think that that's really cool. So yeah. Next question. So what makes simple systems hard to build? So what makes simple systems hard to build? It's not knowing, I guess, to kind of tie back to the previous answer, it's not knowing, the fundamental, the principle. Like, you don't have a strong understanding of the concept, whatever the concept is, right? And I think there's a previous question here, right? Is that like complexity increases because people are trying to, I mean, it was really interesting. Like what did chat have to say here? Complexity increases. Wait, no, hold on. Where was it? Okay. Complexity increases, as a means to kind of provide or to create clarity when it comes to ownership. And that's not really the case. Like, it's more so like in enforcement of a RACI, right? Because again, going back to like roles and responsibilities, so there's some people that could use something like a RACI to dodge any kind of accountability or responsibility, like decision making. Like, so what makes simple systems hard to build? Like, people are just trying to insulate from, or I don't know, that kind of has ulterior motive associated to it. I guess what I'm just trying to say is like, what makes it hard to build? God, that's such a meta question. I don't know. It's like, I don't know. I guess what chat has to say here is kind of interesting. So the subtext on this question, okay, so let me just read the whole thing back. So what makes simple systems hard to build? The subtext here is it that simplicity demands real understanding, while complexity can hide weak thinking? Yeah, I mean, it really is that. And it's so fascinating for me because like I see it in my brain all the time as I'm kind of like making something complicated. It's because I just don't understand what the thing is or how to solve the problem. And it's really great when you like are working with people that are trying to solve the same problem and to hear their point of view and to hear their trials and tribulations. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of tangential. Like, okay, so like take for instance this podcast. Like I hate using the term workflow because it just feels like just a cringy, soundbitey thing to just kind of say, because it's just like in the lexicon now and used kind of not in the right way, but whatever. This podcast, Frame Found in general, I redeveloped the workflow for how, I'm capturing my thoughts, I'm synthesizing them into these outlines, all of my post-production. And it was coming out of a conversation with somebody, in the applications that I'm using. It was coming out of a conversation with somebody who does generally the same thing that I'm doing here. They're doing it in a different context. But it just made me realize, I'm like, oh, geez, like I'm not looking at this is what I'm really trying to achieve, and then knowing what tools to use, how to use AI to prompt things. Like, am I really doing this in the most efficient and effective way? I don't know. It's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I'm trying to kind of add on to when you understand a concept. And it's like, I wouldn't have made these leaps that I've made with doing the podcast had I not had these conversations with somebody that was struggling with the same thing. So it's like, when you want to build a system that takes real understanding, like if you want to build, like, okay, just like, let's just look at this comment. Simplicity demands real understanding. That's a truth. I do truly believe that. How you go about that is different. It changes. But I don't know, as I'm even saying that and I'm thinking about it, there is something very special about working with another human being on the same problem and exchanging all of these thoughts in a very constructive way. That's pretty cool. And I don't know. This almost feels like a hippy dippy way to kind of like end this episode. And I've been debating on wanting to do an episode like this, but like the reason why I love analogies to jujitsu is because it's another part of my life, an entirely separate context in which I'm seeing applications of principles and then drawing parallels to other parts. And those things help each other out. Like even like learning how to play the guitar, there's a lot of principles that are associated to that. And I can't think of anything like really off the top of my head. It's just like really understanding chord progressions and the concept of timing. Just the fact that you can, with like a different combination of even just 5 or 6 chords, you can make entirely different sounds and stuff. Like, I don't know where I'm going with this. I guess what I'm just trying to say, like, let's just read this question back and let me try to end it with the thought that's somewhere in my head right now. So what makes simple systems hard to build? It's not really the question that I really wanted to answer. So what makes simple systems hard to build? Okay, let's end it this way. So what makes simple systems hard to build? Subtext. Is it that simplicity demands real understanding while complexity can hide weak thinking? Yes. How you go about real understanding of a concept is look for it in other parts of your life. That's what I'm trying to say. I like where that ended, and we're going to end the episode right there. So guys, thank you so much for checking out this week's episode of the pod. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. As I always ask in most episodes, let me know your thoughts on this episode. If there's any other kind of topics that you kind of feel like are worth exploring, I would really love to kind of address some of those things like head on with an actual episode. I really do just, like the collaborative. That sounds so campy and corny to say. It's just, I just want to know your thoughts. That's it. So yeah. And if it's your first time checking out the podcast, I really do suggest checking out episodes 1 and 2. Episode 1 is kind of an outline of what the show is all about. Episode 2 is kind of talking about the speech impediment that I have. You'll probably hear it from time to time in this episode. But yeah, again, just thanks for checking it out. And I'll post some links. I should probably try to figure out which side I'm going to post on. you know, links to other episodes, but they're here somewhere. And again, appreciate you guys' time and see you guys on next week's episode. Thanks, everybody.